Now, just to stop here and give some context to what we've been reading. Of all the cities, Philadelphia was one of the smallest, and probably one of the least significant cities in this area of Asia Minor. And we don't know a lot about the city, but one of the things we do know was that a significant portion of the population in Philadelphia was Jewish. And there are those who estimate that at the time in Asia Minor, in that region, there would have been a population of somewhere around 1 million Jewish people who had made that area their home. And Philadelphia was a particular city where a substantial portion of the population, if not the majority of the population, would have had Jewish heritage and background. An interesting thing in Christianity, for instance, if you study the book of Acts and how the Apostle Paul worked, you realize that Christianity arose out of a Jewish context. And the Apostle Paul, when he went to go preach Jesus Christ, first went to the synagogue of any of the various cities that he visited. Why? Because there were people already who held to the Scriptures. They believed that there was just one God who was creator of everything that there is. They were expecting a Savior or a Messiah who would come. And Paul would literally show up and say, hey, listen, the one that you've been expecting is Jesus Christ. And there were from among those Jewish people those who said, yeah, that's right. The entire Old Testament points forward to Jesus Christ. The entire Scriptures, it all makes sense. And they would give their life to Jesus. Of course, there would be another segment of Jewish people who would say, no, Jesus, he's not the one. There's someone else that we're still waiting for. And even among the Jewish people in the synagogue, there arose sort of this debate. And it turns out that over time, what would happen in these various places, and what likely happened here in Philadelphia, would be that these Jewish Christians would just consider themselves, yeah, I am a true Jewish person. They'd stay in the synagogue and continue to worship there. And they would just consider that now their faith is completed as they're now worshiping the true Messiah. But the other Jews started to give some pushback and feedback. And in fact, in the year 90 A.D., there was a council held from among the Jewish people called the Council of Jamnia. And they decided a number of things, but among one of the things that they decided was that Christians were not true Jews, that they had abandoned their faith, and they actually added a prayer to their liturgy, to their worship service, called the 12th benediction. And this prayer that I'm about to show you became like a part of the worship. So when Jewish people would gather together in the synagogue, this would be one of the prayers that they would recite together. And here it is, the 12th benediction from the Council of Jamnia. This is 90 A.D. For the apostates, let there be no hope, and let the arrogant government be speedily uprooted in our days. So the worship services were positive experiences, as you can gather. Let the Nazarenes, now the Nazarenes is a reference to Christians. Jesus was from Nazareth, and so they called Christians Nazarenes. Let the Nazarenes be destroyed in a moment, and let them be blotted out of the book of life, and not be inscribed with the righteous. Blessed art thou, O Lord, who humblest the proud. And this became a part of Jewish worship. Every time they gathered together in the synagogue, they would pray this prayer against Christians. So there was a little bit of tension there, right, between Jews and Christians at that time. Let these Christians be destroyed, and let them be blotted out of the book of life, and not be inscribed with the righteous. This is what they prayed to God. And so probably what's happening in Philadelphia was that these Jewish Christians were actually kicked out of the synagogue. The door was closed, so to speak, and they were excommunicated. And Jesus comes to these people who the door has now been shut to the synagogue, and he says this, these are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. So apparently the synagogue doors have been closed to these Christians. Just don't worry about that. They may say that I don't love you. They may say that you're not a true believer, but I'm the one who really opens and closes the door. And I place an open door in front of you that nobody can shut. Now, you don't know this now, probably, but these words actually come from a passage in the Old Testament. And I'd like you to just put a finger here in this passage and turn in the Old Testament to Isaiah chapter 22. And I think this will help fill out what we're reading here, Isaiah 22. And I want to begin reading at verse 15. As we begin reading, it's kind of a strange passage, but I'll try and explain it to you, and I think it'll make some sense. Isaiah 22, beginning at verse 15. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Go, say to the steward, to Shebna, who is in charge of the palace, what are you doing here, and who gave you permission to cut out a grave for yourself here, hewing your grave on the height and chiseling your resting place in the rock? I told you it was a little strange passage, strange way to begin, but here I'll try and throw it out for you. At the time when Isaiah was writing, there was a king in Israel. His name was Hezekiah. And if you were a king at that time, you had a number of stewards or servants or advisors, and you would have one person who would be like your chief of staff. And anyone who wanted to gain access to the king, who wanted to come and address the king in person, would have to go through the chief of staff. And he generally would hold the key to what was considered the throne room, and whoever he let in would be able to see the king. Whoever he said, no, you can't see the king, would not be let in. And at that time, the name of the man who was that servant, who was like the chief of staff, his name was Shebna. And it turns out that Shebna became a very proud person. And he had commissioned, there was a particular place where all the kings were buried and had their tombs. He had commissioned that a tomb be built where he himself would find a resting place right along with those kings. And God then comes to him and says, what are you doing here, and who gave you permission to cut out a grave for yourself here? Then in verse 17, God says this, beware. The Lord is about to take firm hold of you and hurl you away, O mighty man. He will roll you up tightly like a ball and throw you into a large country. There you will die, and there your splendid chariots will remain, you disgrace to your master's house. Then God says, I will depose you from your office, and you will be ousted from your position. Then if you look at verse 20, it says this, in that day I will summon my servant Eliakim, son of Hilkiah. I will clothe him with your robe and fasten your sash around him and hand your authority over to him. He will be a father to those who live in Jerusalem and to the house of Judah. So in other words, Shebna, you're out. I, God, am going to take care of you. I'm deposing you from your position, and in your place I'm going to put someone else, Eliakim. Now if you're with me, now look at verse 22. I will place on his shoulder the key to the house of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. I will drive him like a peg into a firm place. He will be a seat of honor for the house of his father. All the glory of his family will hang on him, its offspring and offshoots, all the lesser vessels from the bowls to all the jars. So in other words, Eliakim is now going to get the job, and I'm going to give to him the key to the house of David. The house of David were all the kings. And now he was the one who was going to be given the authority, so that whoever wanted to see the king would have to go through him. And it says specifically that on his shoulder, he will be given the key to the house of David. Now, I have in my pocket keys. Our keys are quite small. They look like this. We're able to carry them around in our pocket. We have tools that can create keys this small. Probably at that time, keys were much larger, and so instead of keeping them in your pocket, you would have some kind of sash around your shoulder, and the key would be kept right here to the throne room, and Eliakim would now have that. And he would be given total authority. Whoever he says can see the king, can see the king. Whoever he says cannot see the king, cannot see the king. The specific language is this. What he opens, no one can shut. And what he shuts, no one can open. So you see that? Turn back to Revelation chapter 3. So Jesus is speaking to this church. He says, okay, these are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. See the language? Then he says, what he opens, no one can shut. And what he shuts, no one can open. Now this verse is the Christ title in this particular letter. And so these words are about Jesus Christ. He's saying, I'm the one who holds the key. I'm the one who lets someone in to see the king or closes the door so they can't see the king. And he says, I know your deeds. And see, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut.